She thought she was buying an old hangar for scrap, maybe flip the steel and concrete for parts. But inside, beneath decades of dust, was something no one expected. A rust-covered World War II P-27 Thunderbolt, still bearing the scars of a mission never declassified. Riley Monroe didn't know it yet, but that plane would unravel the story of a hero erased by history and rewrite her own future in the process. What started as a $1,000 gamble became a $3 million revelation. Before we jump in, let us know where you're watching from. And if you believe that some machines carry more than just metal, that they carry memory, purpose, and redemption, hit that subscribe button. Because tomorrow's story, it might just be even wilder than this one. The real estate listing didn't show much, just a single blurry photo of a rusted metal hangar, long abandoned, sitting on the edge of a cracked runway that hadn't felt a wheel in decades. Riley Monroe stared at it on her laptop in the back of her shop, one oil-streaked hand curled around a coffee mug, the other dragging a grease-stained finger across the trackpad. $1,000. No inspections. Sold as is. Most people would have laughed and closed the tab. She hit buy now. There was no reason for it, really just instinct, the same gut whisper that had led her to rescue broken-down trucks and gutted motorcycles and give them new lives. Maybe this hangar was the same. Or maybe she just needed to feel like she still knew how to take a risk. The paperwork went through in 3 days. The county clerk didn't ask questions, just handed her the deed like she was buying a used fridge. Riley tossed her toolbox in the back of her truck, loaded a crowbar and flashlight, and headed west out of Ash Ridge, past the cornfields and abandoned gas stations, until the asphalt turned to dirt and the horizon swallowed everything man-made but barbed wire and silence. The hangar sat like a dead tooth in the gum of the prairie, jagged, stained, forgotten. Wind scraped through broken windows like it was trying to get out, not in. Her boots echoed as she stepped inside. Dust swallowed her whole. The air smelled of rot, rust, and motor oil so old it had turned to syrup. Piles of forgotten parts, shattered pallets, and curled-up spiders lined the corners like tombstones to a life no one remembered. She kept walking, boots crunching over broken glass and ancient paperwork, until her flashlight beam caught something that stopped her heart cold. It wasn't junk. It wasn't scrap. It was a plane. Not a Cessna, not a crop duster, but a hulking, long-nosed warbird buried under 2 decades of grime. Twin engines, wide wingspan, shark-mouth nose art half faded. Her breath caught. Riley stepped closer. There, just visible through the dust on the fuselage, were 6 numbers stenciled in white. Her fingers trembled as she brushed them clean. P-27 Thunderbolt, a legend. A ghost. A machine that shouldn't exist. Not here, not like this. The landing gear was locked in place. Tires dry-rotted to the rims. One wing had a softball-sized dent. The propellers hadn't turned in years. And yet the body was whole. No crash damage, no missing panels, no burn marks, just waiting. Like someone parked it here and never came back. She stood there, frozen in the shaft of late afternoon light pouring through the busted roof. One hand pressed against cool aluminum. Her voice came out like a whisper. "What the hell are you doing here?" Behind her, the wind slammed a loose panel against the frame with a metallic scream. Riley didn't flinch. She took a step back and looked up at the canopy. Dusty but not shattered. Inside, a worn leather helmet sat on the seat, still resting exactly where a pilot might have left it 70 years ago. She didn't move, didn't breathe. Something had just changed, and she could feel it in her bones. The next morning, Riley was back at the hangar before the sun even cracked the horizon. She hadn't slept much. Her brain had been on fire all night, chasing possibilities and questions she couldn't outrun. A P-27 Thunderbolt. Here, abandoned, untouched. It didn't make sense. There were only a few known to exist, mostly stripped and mounted in museums. And yet, this one sat alone in Bay 3, gathering dust and ghosts. She pushed the hangar doors open just as the sky turned pale, her breath visible in the cold morning air. The metal creaked like a warning. She brought tools this time. Flashlight, gloves, a camera, and a notebook. She moved carefully, slowly circling the plane like a detective at a crime scene. The markings were mostly intact, faded squadron insignia on the tail, serial numbers under the wing, and a yellow band around the nose cone, now chipped and dull. Near the cockpit, 6 black-painted kill marks were stenciled in a tight row, but no name, no call sign, no crew tag. It was like someone had tried to erase its identity but hadn't quite finished the job. She climbed the rusted ladder, resting against the fuselage, one step at a time, until she reached the canopy. The glass was hazy, but not cracked. She cupped her hand to the surface, peering inside. The cockpit was eerily clean, dials and gauges intact, seat cushions faded but unshredded. The leather helmet was still there, but next to it, tucked into the side panel, was something else. A photograph. Riley froze. She hesitated, then popped the canopy with a grunt. It groaned, but gave way. The smell that hit her was old leather, dust, and something fainter like aftershave and engine grease. She climbed in, knees shaking slightly. The photo was taped above the instrument panel, a black and white snapshot. A young man in a flight suit, leaning against the same plane, smiling wide with a cigarette in his teeth. Behind him, blurry in the background, was a woman holding a lunchbox and waving at the camera. Riley studied it for a long moment, then gently peeled it free. She climbed back down, heart hammering, mind racing. This wasn't just a forgotten plane. Someone had cared for it, someone had flown it, and someone had hidden it here away from the world. Back in the office attached to the hangar, she rifled through dusty drawers and rotting file folders. Most were full of junk invoices from the 70 seconds, flight logs for crop dusters, a faded airfield map. But then, behind a broken cabinet, she found a clipboard sealed in a plastic bag. Inside, brittle and yellowing, were 2 maintenance reports marked TOP Priority in red ink. Both were for the same plane. P-27 B Thunderbolt prototype. One dated 1951. The other, 1952. Each signed by someone with the initials R.M. Riley blinked. Her father's initials. The wind picked up again outside, slamming another loose panel against the steel frame. She didn't jump this time. She was too busy staring at the clipboard, her fingers tightening. What the hell was this plane doing here? Why had no one found it before? And why, buried under dust and time, did it feel like it had been waiting for her? 3 days passed before Riley told anyone. She spent them lost inside the hangar, combing through every bolt, every wire, every scrap of paper that hadn't been turned to mulch by time. It became a routine. Arrive before sunrise, leave after dark, covered in dust and silence. The plane started to haunt her, not in a scary way, but in a magnetic one. Every time she touched it, it felt like something was reaching back. She stopped calling it the Thunderbolt. She started calling it her. By Friday, the questions were eating her alive. She took a high-res photo of the man in the cockpit photo and posted it anonymously to an aviation history forum, just asking, "Does anyone recognize this pilot or this aircraft?" Found in an abandoned hangar. She didn't expect much, but by morning, her inbox was full. Most of the replies were dead ends, amateur historians with guesses. But one stood out. A simple message. "That's Captain Wesley Lang, my father. I need to speak with you." Riley stared at the email for a long time before replying. A video call was set up that afternoon. She sat in her truck with her laptop perched on the dash, hands fidgeting in her lap. The connection buzzed, then blinked to life. On the screen appeared a woman in her 70s, with the same sharp cheekbones as the pilot in the photo, and eyes that looked like they'd seen too many goodbyes. "My name is Ellen Lang," the woman said. That plane belonged to my father." Riley swallowed. "Captain Wesley Lang, you're sure?" "I'm positive," Ellen replied. "That photo was taken the day before he disappeared." Riley froze. "Disappeared?" Ellen nodded slowly. "In 952. He flew out of Wright-Patterson on what was supposed to be a test flight. Only it wasn't. It was something else. We were told he crashed over Lake Michigan, but no wreckage was ever found. My mother never believed it. She said he was too good, too careful, that he'd been taken hidden. She died saying that. And now, 73 years later, you've found his plane. Riley didn't know what to say. She felt like she was holding a ghost between her palms. There's more, she said quietly. I found 2 maintenance reports, top secret, both signed with my dad's initials. He worked on government projects in the 82nds, but I never knew this. Ellen's face softened. Then maybe we were both meant to find it now. Together. The screen went quiet for a long moment, each woman processing their own storm. Then, Ellen leaned forward. Would you let me see her? In person? Riley didn't hesitate. Yes, come to Ash Ridge. She's waiting. That night, Riley sat alone in the cockpit again, staring at the spot where the photo had been taped. She felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear, not doubt. It was connection. And she realized she wasn't rebuilding a plane. She was resurrecting a story someone tried to bury. Ellen arrived just after noon 2 days later, in a rental car with Ohio plates and a suitcase that looked older than Riley. She stepped out cautiously, one hand bracing against the wind, the other clutching a faded photograph of her father, one Riley recognized immediately. It was the same image from the cockpit, only larger, clearer. They didn't hug. They just looked at each other, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. Not of faces, but of purpose. Of the strange, aching pull that had led them both to the same forgotten hangar. They walked inside together, the steel doors groaning shut behind them. Ellen didn't speak for a long time. She stood in front of the Thunderbolt like it was a headstone, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch the cold fuselage. Riley watched her fingers trace the faded paint, the kill marks, the number stenciled near the nose. He used to whistle while he pre-flighted, Ellen said softly. Sinatra, always Sinatra. Riley didn't interrupt. Ellen moved toward the cockpit ladder but didn't climb. Her eyes stayed fixed on the canopy. My mom told me once, if something's too painful to face, the government just buries it, fakes a story, pays you to be quiet. She thought that's what they did to my father. I thought she was just grieving. Riley cleared her throat. There's something else I want to show you. They walked together to the office in the back. Riley had cleared off the desk, laid out every document she'd found, blueprints, logs, even a torn page with Operation Rook scrawled across the top in red ink. Ellen's face tightened. She picked up one page, scanned the text, then froze. This isn't a Thunderbolt, she said slowly. Not entirely. What do you mean? Ellen flipped the paper around. The P-27 was a short-run airframe. But this? This has internal systems way beyond the original specs. Look here. Jet-assisted takeoff modules. Retractable wing modification schematics. These weren't standard. Not in 1952. Riley leaned in. Then, what was it? A hybrid, Ellen whispered. A prototype they never admitted to. Riley frowned. I thought the P-27 line ended in 49. It did. Publicly. Ellen tapped the blueprint again. Operation Rook. My dad mentioned it once. Late at night. Said he was flying something not even supposed to exist. Then he shut up about it forever. Riley turned to the other documents. Several pages were missing, torn cleanly from a central binder. She'd noticed it before, but now it felt deliberate. A redacted truth. Someone had wanted this plane hidden. Someone had nearly succeeded. Ellen stepped back. They said his body was never recovered. Now I know why. There was no crash. He brought the plane here. Riley stared at the aircraft through the office window. The weight of it settled into her chest like gravity. He hid it, she said softly. To protect it, Ellen nodded. Or to protect us. They stood in silence, the buzzing light above them flickering like a bad memory. Outside, the wind picked up again, slamming something against the hangar walls. The Thunderbolt didn't move. But it didn't feel dead either. The restoration began in silence. Riley didn't announce it. She didn't post online or call in favors. She just showed up the next morning with a rolling stool, a heavy-duty toolbox, and the kind of quiet determination you don't learn from books. She opened the bay doors wide and let the sun fall across the plane's weathered skin. Then she rolled up her sleeves and began. The Thunderbolt wasn't just dirty, she was tired. Her joints ached, her seams wept rust, and her internals hadn't felt voltage since Truman was president. But she was whole. That mattered more than anything. Riley started with the obvious, stripping back the surface corrosion with a wire wheel, sanding down decades of neglect until the metal beneath began to show its shine. It was slow work, meditative, a kind of communion. Every bolt she turned, every panel she removed, it felt like peeling back a layer of silence. Ellen stayed nearby but didn't hover. She brought coffee, took notes, read the flight logs over and over like they were scripture. Sometimes she sat outside the hangar in a lawn chair, hat shielding her face from the sun, just watching, waiting. On the third day, Riley pulled off a rusted inspection panel beneath the wing and found something wedged in the cavity, a small, sealed tin wrapped in waxed paper. Her heart jumped. She carried it to the workbench, hands shaking as she pried it open. Inside, an old pilot's patch, 2 folded photos, and a slip of paper with a name and a warning. Captain Fortio, Wesley Lang. Do not trust Archer. She showed Ellen. The name meant nothing, but the warning? It rewrote everything. They doubled down after that. Riley called a friend from her old aviation tech school, a guy named Drew who now ran diagnostics at a small regional airfield. He came with a scanner, a borrowed laptop, and 2 cases of soda. When he saw the plane, he whistled low. "Where'd you find this? A time machine?" Riley just handed him the schematics. For 3 weeks, they worked side by side. Day in, day out, testing cables, mapping circuitry, identifying gauges Riley had never seen in modern builds. The cockpit wiring was a maze of conventional tech spliced with something experimental. Like someone had been building a plane that could outrun not just enemies, but reality itself. By the time the hydraulic lines were flushed and the rudder cables replaced, something had changed, not just in the plane. In Riley, the hangar had become more than a workspace. It felt like a confession booth. Every wrench turn, every cleaned part, it was like she was rebuilding something in herself too, a sense of place, of story, of bloodlines, written in steel. Ellen noticed. "You talked to her," she said one night as Riley scrubbed down the main gear strut. Riley glanced up. "Who?" Ellen smiled softly. "The plane," like she's listening. Riley didn't answer. She just nodded, because deep down, she believed it too. It was a Tuesday when Riley found it. She'd been up since dawn, crawling under the belly of the Thunderbolt, inspecting the underside of the fuselage for stress fractures or corrosion lines she might have missed. The hangar was quiet, save for the occasional clatter of her socket wrench and the distant hum of a passing crop duster. The old warbird sat heavy and dignified above her, propped on jacks, stripped of most of her outer skin now, revealing ribs and rivets and veins like an anatomical sketch. Riley was tightening a stubborn bolt on the left flap actuator when her hand hit something that didn't belong, a small bulge. Seamless. Painted over. She ran her fingers across it again. No latch, no screws. Just a smooth rectangle near the wing root, like a door that had been meant to stay hidden. She grabbed a heat gun and a putty knife. 2 hours later, the panel gave way. Behind it, folded carefully and wrapped in oilcloth, was a steel box, small, unmarked, cold as a grave. Riley sat back on the floor, heart thudding. She called for Ellen, who came running, breath short, eyes wide. They opened it together. Inside was a letter-thick paper, sealed in a wax envelope, and beneath it, a dog tag. Wesley Lang. Blood type O+. No rank, no branch. Just the name. Riley broke the seal. The paper crackled. "To whoever finds this aircraft. If you're reading this, then either I never made it back, or I made it back and chose silence. Either way, the truth matters now. The letter was dated the 7th of July, 1952. The ink had faded, but the handwriting was tight, clear, military-trained. Riley read aloud as Ellen sat beside her, one hand covering her mouth. This plane was part of something we were never supposed to talk about. A project that blurred the line between progress and madness. We called it Rook, but the men behind it called it insurance. Insurance against a war they were certain would come. A war that didn't care about rules or physics or pilots. I flew the prototype once. Just once. And I've seen things no engine should do. Riley's voice cracked. I wanted to walk away. I wanted to speak up. I was told if I did, my family would pay the price. So I brought her here. Faked a crash. Disappeared her. I couldn't destroy her, though. She wasn't the villain. She was the victim. The last line was written in a shakier hand. If my daughter ever finds this, Ellen, I'm sorry. I did what I had to. Not for country. For you. The letter slipped from Riley's fingers. Ellen didn't move. She was staring straight ahead, the tears on her cheeks silent, steady. Her father's words, after 70 years, had finally reached her. They sat there on the hangar floor, the box between them, the Thunderbolt casting long shadows in the evening light. Riley didn't speak. She just rested a hand on the wing, like it was the shoulder of a fallen comrade. Some machines carry secrets. Some carry souls. This one carried both. The letter changed everything. Ellen didn't leave the hangar for 2 days. She slept on a cot Riley set up in the back office, rising early and falling asleep late, as if she were afraid her father's ghost might vanish again if she looked away too long. She read the letter a dozen times, memorizing every loop of his handwriting. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she just stared at the Thunderbolt, like it was breathing. Riley kept working. Not because she wanted to ignore what they'd found, but because it felt like the only respectful thing to do. The aircraft was more than a machine now. It was a time capsule, a coffin, and a confession all in one. Every bolt she turned felt personal. Every weld felt like closing a wound. She had almost finished removing the lower panel beneath the cockpit when she noticed something she'd missed before a faint engraving on the inside of the metal brace. Tiny initials, hand-etched with a punch tool. R.M. The same ones from the clipboard, the same ones as her father's. She called her mother that night. They hadn't spoken in weeks, not since Riley had told her she was buying the hangar. There had been yelling, accusations, words like irresponsible, wasting your life, never enough. But now her voice was gentler, curious. "Mom," Riley said slowly, "did Dad ever talk about working on something secret? Like, really secret? Around the time I was little?" There was a long pause. Then, "He signed an NDA before you were born. I wasn't even supposed to know, but I remember the way he came home from work during that contract. Quieter, always tired. Like something heavy was sitting on his chest. He wouldn't talk about it. Just said the world was darker than we thought, and some machines shouldn't exist." Riley felt her chest tighten. "What kind of machine?" she whispered. "He never said," her mother replied. "But I remember, once, he had a photo. Of a plane. Strange one. Said it flew like a dream and kept him up at night. I only saw it once, then it disappeared." Riley thanked her, voice low, heart racing. She didn't sleep that night. Just stood in the hangar, staring at the bare skeleton of the Thunderbolt. The wind outside moaned through the rafters like it was trying to speak. Riley wrapped her arms around herself and wondered what kind of legacy gets built in silence, in secrecy, in sweat and fear and steel. Maybe her dad hadn't just signed a contract. Maybe he'd left a breadcrumb trail. Maybe this wasn't an accident at all. By morning, Riley had made her decision. This restoration wouldn't be cosmetic. It wouldn't be a flip project or a collector's prize. It would be a resurrection of a man, a message, a machine, and the truth buried beneath layers of metal, dust, and memory. The morning was cold, even for late spring. The air held that tense stillness that always comes right before something changes. Riley stepped into the hangar wearing 3 layers, none of them matching, with a coffee in one hand and a checklist in the other. Her boots echoed against the concrete, but the space didn't feel empty. Not anymore. The Thunderbolt loomed in the center like a monument, sanded, sealed, rewired, reassembled. Not flawless, not factory, but honest. Every part touched by hands that carried history. Drew arrived just after sunrise, his sleeves rolled and his brow already furrowed. He carried a duffel bag full of tools and a tension that didn't come from caffeine. "You sure about this?" he asked, as he eyed the fully restored airframe. "No," Riley said flatly, sipping her coffee. "But we're doing it anyway." They worked in sync, moving through final system checks like surgeons in an old operating room. Battery levels, fuel lines, hydraulic pressure, avionics. Every test passed. Every gauge responded. It felt impossible, but it was real. Ellen stood in the corner, her father's dog tags around her neck, and the letter folded into the pocket of her sweater. She didn't say much, just watched, lips pressed into a line that betrayed how much she was holding in. Riley climbed the ladder to the cockpit, slower this time. Not out of fear, but reverence. The controls gleamed in the morning light, polished and waiting. She strapped herself in and looked down at Drew. "You ready?" "I'm not the one in the seat," he muttered, but nodded. The hangar doors groaned open, spilling golden light across the cracked runway outside. Riley flipped the ignition switches one by one, her fingers moving on instinct, guided more by feeling than experience. She'd read the manuals, studied the notes, memorized every wire, but now it had to live. She turned the key. The Thunderbolt coughed. Once. Twice. Then the engine caught. A low growl rumbled through the hangar walls, rising into a full-bodied roar that made Drew stumble back and Ellen cover her mouth. The propellers spun, chopping the morning stillness into pieces. Oil pressure held steady. Exhaust curled into the air like breath from lungs unused for half a century. Riley gripped the yoke with white knuckles. Her eyes flicked across the dash. Everything was holding. Drew climbed up beside her on the ladder, half shouting over the noise. "You good?" Riley nodded. "She's good." They taxied slowly out onto the strip. No takeoff today, just a test run. Riley kept her hands steady as the Thunderbolt rolled forward, engine humming like a memory reborn. At the edge of the runway, she killed the throttle and let her breathe. She sat in silence, the prop spinning down, her heart louder than the engine ever was. In the mirror, she saw Ellen outside the hangar, wiping her eyes. "She's alive," Riley whispered to herself. "After all this time, she's alive." The story got out before Riley was ready. Drew posted a single photo of the Thunderbolt on the runway, her new skin gleaming, propellers mid-spin, sunrise flaring behind her like a halo. He didn't add a caption. He didn't need to. The internet did the rest. By the next afternoon, Riley's inbox was a war zone. Aviation blogs, local newspapers, veterans forums, even a national network had somehow caught wind. Everyone wanted to know, was it real? Was it restored? Was it for sale? She didn't answer. She just kept showing up at the hangar, tightening bolts that didn't need tightening, pretending she didn't feel the pressure creeping in through every message, every ring of the phone. Then came the letters, real ones. Certified envelopes slid under the door, offers, bids, numbers with too many zeros. One collector from Arizona offered $2.1 million and a blank check for future projects. A war museum in Virginia said they'd name a wing after her. An anonymous buyer from Switzerland offered $3 million, sight unseen, and promised she could keep the hangar. Riley sat at the workbench, all the letters fanned out like playing cards. Ellen stood behind her, quiet, but not neutral. "You ever think you'd be worth this much?" Riley asked the plane. "She already was," Ellen said. "Before anyone offered a cent." Riley exhaled hard. "What would your dad have done?" Ellen didn't hesitate. He would have told them no, because this wasn't about the money. It was about making sure people remember what happened when nobody was supposed to know. The next morning, a black SUV rolled up to the hangar. A woman stepped out, mid-40 seconds, sharp blazer, worn boots. She introduced herself as Director Hall from the National Military Aviation Museum. She didn't waste time. We don't have $3 million, but we do have something else. Legacy. Riley raised an eyebrow. You keep the plane, Hall continued. We fund a full exhibition right here, in this hangar. We document every part of this restoration. We tell Wesley Lang's story. We tell your father's story. And yours. Riley stared at her. Why? Hall shrugged. Because too many of these stories disappear. And maybe it's time people knew what really happened behind the curtains of history. They walked through the hangar together. Hall ran her fingers along the fuselage. She belongs here. Not locked in glass. Not roped off. Alive. Riley didn't respond. Not right away, but when she looked at the Thunderbolt, at the patches of metal her hands had shaped, at the letter still framed above her workbench, she knew the answer had already formed days ago. That evening, she emailed every buyer, declined every offer, and accepted one. The one that didn't come with money, but with meaning. 3 months later, the hangar didn't look abandoned anymore. The rusted panels were still there, but now they were deliberate, left like scars on purpose, reminders of what it had survived. The cracked runway had been patched just enough to guide curious feet. A hand-painted wooden sign hung above the entrance. Lang, Monroe Aviation History Site. It didn't sparkle. It didn't need to. The stories inside were loud enough. The museum team had moved in quickly after Riley's decision. But they didn't take over. They listened. They asked. They let Riley and Ellen lead. Ellen curated her father's personal artifacts, uniforms, photos, a diary they'd found tucked inside a false drawer beneath the pilot seat. Riley provided the rest: blueprints, before and after pictures, the sealed letter, even the hidden message scrawled under the wing. The Thunderbolt, the centerpiece, didn't rest behind velvet ropes. She sat in the center of the hangar on display, cockpit open, scars unpolished. Visitors were allowed to touch her. That was Riley's rule. She's not here to be admired, she said during the soft opening. She's here to be remembered. People came. Not thousands, but enough. Veterans in wheelchairs. Pilots in pressed uniforms. Kids who didn't know the difference between a fuselage and a fishtail, but left asking about classified missions and the Cold War. One boy, maybe 12, stared at the aircraft for 10 full minutes before turning to his dad and saying, "She looks like she's listening." Ellen smiled for days after that. Riley kept working, of course. She never stopped turning wrenches, but now the shop out back had a second lift, a wall of thank you letters, and a waiting list 6 months long. People didn't just bring in cars, they brought in stories. They wanted Riley to be part of their restorations, not just the metal, but the meaning. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, when the museum had closed for the day and the last visitor's car had rolled away, Riley stood alone beneath the Thunderbolt's wing. She reached up and ran her fingers along the curve of the fuselage, then looked up at the cockpit, still empty, still waiting. She climbed the ladder, sat in the seat, closed her eyes. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the wind outside and the soft creak of settling metal. Then she whispered, "We kept the promise." Later that night, back in the office, she and Ellen sat beside each other in the glow of the old desk lamp. They didn't say much. They didn't need to. On the wall above them, framed behind glass, was the letter from Wesley Lang. Below it, a small bronze plaque. Some machines carry more than engines. They carry the weight of memory, sacrifice, and story. Thank you for listening. And in the dark of a quiet hangar, the soul of a plane and the legacy of those who touched it stayed wide awake.